Good morning and welcome to the feast of Jalaluddin Rumi's wisdom. Such a joy to talk about it. I'd like to begin with a tender message from him to all of us. So take in these words from a 13th century, think of it, a 13th century Sufi poet. Inside you are sweet beyond telling. There is a sun in everyone. I become a mirror which cannot close its eyes to your longing. My eyes wet with yours in the early light. My mind every moment giving birth, always conceiving, always in the 9th month. And then an empty sky. And everything is soul and flowering. Everything is soul and flowering. Talking about Rumi's wisdom is a bit like trying to explain a meteor or an orchid. But Rumi offers us a simple invitation when he says words that will be familiar to most of you. Come, come, whoever you are, worshiper, wanderer, lover of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come, come again, come. By way of invitation to what's ahead, Rumi also says, I have 5 things to say to the beloved. First, when I was apart from you, this world did not exist, nor any other. Second, whatever I was wanting was always you. Third, why did I learn to count to 3? Fourth, my cornfield is burning. 5. Well, 5 stands for wisdom and confusion. Is weeping speech? What shall I do with all this love? What shall I do with all this love? So she speaks, and everyone around her cries with her, laughing crazily at the spreading union of lover and beloved. This is true religion. All others are torn away bandages beside it. This is slavery and mastery dancing together. I know these dancers. Day and night I sing their songs in this phenomenal cage. My soul, don't try to answer yet. Find a friend and hide. But what can be hidden? Love is always looking out from under the covers. Here I am. It's not surprising that Rumi has become the best-selling poet in the English-speaking world. Clearly, he's one of the greatest poets of all time. The United Nations honored him on his 800th anniversary, the 800th anniversary of his birth, and annual celebrations have been done in Konya ever since he passed away many years ago. In the English-speaking world, many people see Rumi as more influential than Shakespeare and Dante. And in the Persian-speaking world, he has been read and cherished for centuries. His works have been translated into many languages, and they have influenced Afghans and Turks and Kurds and Greeks and many more for centuries now. So today I want to offer you some of Rumi's wisdom on profound subjects like grief and death and joy. I find his personal story fascinating. He was born in 1207 in Balkh, in what is now Afghanistan. He was born into a scholarly family. His father was a great Sufi mystic. And it was the time of the Christian Crusades and the Mongol invasions. Rumi's father fled the unrest of his original home and took his family on a long journey, which meant that Rumi's childhood and adolescence were spent traveling long distances. I looked up a vision of this, a visual of this, and saw camels traveling across the desert. So They didn't get in their Mercedes. They got on their camels, I guess, and took their long journey to Aleppo, to Damascus, to Mecca, to many more places, finally settling in Konya, Turkey, where Rumi's father became the head of a great Sufi community there. Meanwhile, Rumi studied. He continued his studies in jurisprudence and language, extensive studies of the Quran, mathematics, Sufi wisdom, and so much more. Rumi married at 18 and had 2 children. After his first wife died, he married again and had 2 more. When Rumi was only 25 years old, his father died, and Rumi ascended. Rumi took over the place that his father had, and Rumi, at 25 years old, became the head of this large Sufi community, and he was viewed as a brilliant young ascetic, approved by all, which turned out to be a kind of a dangerous state. Rumi was 37 when the thunderbolt struck. He met Shams of Tabriz. Shams, the name literally means the sun. And Shams was a wandering, fully realized mystic searching everywhere for someone capable of understanding and translating his profound wisdom to the world. There are several accounts of their meeting. In one of them, Rumi is riding into the public square on a donkey with some of his followers, and Shams approaches him, pulls on the bridle, and asks him a question so profound and unanswerable that Rumi falls off the donkey. He faints. In another account, Rumi is sitting in the public square next to the fountain with his priceless books around him, which he's studying. And Shams comes over to him and shoves all the books into the water and says, "It's time that you started living what you teach." And then he retrieved the perfectly dry books. In any case, Shams and Rumi had an instant and profound connection. They shared a soul-to-soul love, a love beyond age and gender, beyond all ordinary forms of love. It was a love fueled by a mutual passion for the divine. Rumi began his transformation as they fasted, meditated, had long private retreats, spent endless hours together. Rumi was beginning to change. His beliefs and his ideas, his very identity, were shattered by love. He was becoming love, a process he later described as, "I was raw, then I was burnt, then I was cooked." Shams and Rumi spent some 3 years together, united in their passionate search for truth. But Rumi's followers were jealous. They didn't care for having their beloved teacher being monopolized by this stranger, this intruder. So as a result, partly at least, of this conflict in the community, Shams went missing twice. The first time, it was without warning. He just disappeared, and Rumi was distraught. He had no idea what to do. He sent out messages in every direction, trying to get any information he could about where to find Shams. And eventually he heard that Shams could be in Damascus. There's a story that Shams, when found by Rumi's son, was speaking to a young wastrel who later became Francis of Assisi, but that's another story. So the son brought Shams back to Rumi, and they fell in each other's arms. They danced, they sang, they were so thrilled to be together again, and they immediately resumed their habits of studying and praying and meditating and fasting. This went on for a long time, and Rumi was even more, his heart was even more open this second time. But like every human love, it had to come to an end. And one day Shams announced, I'm called to my death. He walked out the door, and this time he did not return. Rumi looked everywhere. He sent messengers everywhere he could think of. There was no success, and some people think that Shams was murdered. No one really knows. All we know is that he disappeared and never returned. And when it was clear that he was gone and not coming back, Rumi went mad with grief. He walked the streets speaking gibberish. He wept, he sang. He was inconsolable. He was unreachable. He was uninterested in any overtures from his family and his students. It's a lesson for all of us in our times of grief. I'm guessing there are people listening right now that have lost someone very precious to them. So Rumi is showing us the way here. At this point, he is inconsolable. He sees no remedy for his grief. It seems like the only reality to him. And it was years before he would find peace, before he realized that the final veil was dissolving. So slowly, very slowly, Rumi came to understand that there had been no true loss. Shams was within him. In fact, the loss of Shams' physical presence made it possible for there to be a birth of Shams' essence within Rumi's heart. When Rumi realized what had happened, and in great illustration to all of us and as to how we may address our grief, when he realized what had happened, that he had not lost Shams, that he could not lose Shams, he began, his grief and misery was replaced by ecstatic radiance, and poetry began to flow from him in what turned out to be tens of thousands of stunning verses. He lived that ecstasy that he experienced then for the rest of his life and expressed it in his poetry. His suffering had bought this incredible joy that he now felt. And it flowered then in such glorious beauty that amazing to think it has come down to us over these 8 centuries so that we are now privileged. Perhaps it's because it took us that long to wake up, to be able to hear Rumi and to experience his vision, his teachings. In his new joyfulness, Rumi said, each time I say Rumi said, it means I'm going to recite one of his poems. This is one of my favorites. One morning I went to a place beyond dawn, a source of sweetness that flows and is never less. I have been shown a beauty beyond imagining. There's a fountain inside you. Don't walk around with an empty bucket. There's a basket of fresh bread on your head, yet you go door to door asking for crusts. Knock on the inner door, no other. Slushing knee deep in fresh river water, you keep asking for other people's water bags. Water is everywhere around you, but you see only barriers that keep you from water. Mad with thirst, you cannot drink from the stream that's running close by your face. You're like a pearl on the deep ocean bottom, inside the shell, saying, "Where's the ocean?" These mental questionings form the barrier. Beg for love expansion. Meditate only on that. Rumi predicted his own death, and he spoke of it as his wedding day with the beloved. He died fearlessly on December 17th, 1273, and even then he taught us many lessons. Death awaits us. We are aware, although we don't want to be. Denying it makes us forget to cherish every moment of our living and our loving. When we fear death and when we deny it, we may cherish the secret hope that we'll escape it somehow, at least until we're too old to care. No such day ever comes, it seems, except to the very, very ill. But if our hearts are open to him, Rumi can inspire us to be peaceful about death. For him, instead of being repelled and terrified by annihilation, as we tend to be, Rumi welcomed it. Freedom from ego, from personality, from personal history. To Rumi, these are wings to freedom and ultimate joy. Interesting thought that we are kept from joy by our attachment to our personalities and our personal history. No one knows what I've been through. To Rumi, there are wings to freedom, as I said, and to ultimate joy. Rumi and many other great mystics speak as one voice in this. At Rumi's funeral, there was an unprecedented outpouring of emotion from Christians, Jews, Buddhists, Sufis, and other Muslims, members of other faiths. All of them came together, and they all insisted that Rumi represented the true nature of whoever was most sacred to them: Christ, Muhammad, Moses, Buddha, and other prophets. I've found that Rumi always has an answer to my personal dilemmas. One of these came about when I was visiting my aging mother in Tucson, Arizona, my hometown. On these visits, it was my practice to do morning prayers with her, just the same way that I did them as a child. I didn't mind giving her that gift, although my own views of things had changed, but I was glad to spend that time with her. So that first morning on one of the visits, we're having prayers at her clawfoot oak round table, and she prayed aloud, "God help me, God help the cancer doctor I'm seeing on Wednesday. Help him to help me if it be thy will." My eyes flew open in shock. I had known about her colonoscopy, but I thought the results were not in. I knocked over my cup of coffee, and it started to drip on the blue ruffled cushion where my long-gone precious father used to sit. My mom jumped up to clean up the coffee, and she turned away from me. I couldn't tell whether the fear that washed over me was hers or mine. "The doctor says they can take it out," she said. "God is good." 3 weeks later, I sat alone in the hospital waiting room during a very, very long surgery. When the doctor finally came out to talk to me, the news was bad. She has metastases in her liver and uterus and colon. There's too much to take out. We'll put her on hospice. I was shocked and sobbing. That night, I dozed all the night in a chair, waking up to give her the moistened sponges she was allowed. And at one point in the middle of the night, she opened her eyes and looked me fully in my eyes and said, "I love you," and then fell promptly back asleep again. Those words touched me because I had not heard them often for a very long time. It had been difficult for her to accept a daughter, her only child, who no longer accepted what she felt was the only true faith, the evangelical faith that I was raised in. 8 months later, I was privileged to be holding my mother's hand when she took her last breath. She had a gentle death at home in her own bed as she wished. I tried to keep the oak table, but it always made me cry. But Rumi says, on the day I die, don't say she's gone. Death has nothing to do with going away. The sun sets and the moon sets, but they're not gone. Death is a coming together. The human seed goes down into the ground like a bucket and comes up with some unimaginable beauty. Your mouth closes here and immediately opens with a shout of joy there. So we've looked at grief and at death in Rumi's terms. And now I'd like to offer you Rumi's answer to how we can change and experience more joy. Because I think that's Rumi's wish for us, to live every day with joy. Personally, I never quite succeed in that, but I'm always trying. Rumi says this is how a human being can change. There's a worm addicted to eating grape leaves. Suddenly he wakes up. Call it grace, whatever. He's no longer a worm. He's the entire vineyard, the orchard too, the fruit, the trunks, a growing wisdom and joy. In my work as a psychotherapist, I understand these words to mean that change is always possible and that grace is both needed and available. As a therapist, I do my very best to provide the unconditional positive regard that every outcome study tells us is crucial to helping people change. Through attentive listening, unwavering support, and a lot of grace, I've been privileged to help so many of my treasured patients heal their relationships, overcome depression and addiction, resolve suicidal thoughts, forgive and become free of their cruel or oblivious parents or abusers or unfaithful spouses or hurtful relatives. I celebrate their courage and their healing, and I think of my part as a tremendous privilege. I was privileged to spend 3 of the best years of my life reading Rumi every day and writing a book about him. It's called The Rumi Secret. A Rumi-inspired psychologist speaks of love, grief, and joy as spiritual practice. The next edition will be out by the end of the year. It's not available right now. But meanwhile, it's been translated into Farsi and published in Iran, which was very exciting to me. During those years of Rumi immersion, I learned more about human change that I think that I had ever learned before, including, the years of work as a psychologist. I learned a different level of human change, including things like how to deepen my awareness of the beauty in every rock and flower and human face. I meant to have one of all of those, and I forgot to do that, but just imagine I have a rock here, a flower here, and then I have a mirror for you to look into to see that precious human face. Okay. Rumi says, for 60 years, I've been forgetful every moment, but not for a second has this flowing toward me stopped or slowed. Another of Rumi's poems advises us on how to progress in our spiritual lives. Another favorite of mine, Rumi says, in the last hour before morning, 2 lovers wake and take a drink of water. She asks, do you love me or yourself more? Really, tell the absolute truth. request. He says, there's nothing left of me. I'm like a ruby held up to the sunrise. Is it still a stone or a world made of redness? It has no resistance to sunlight. Be courageous and discipline yourself. Work and keep digging your well. Don't think about getting off from work. Soul water is there somewhere. Submit to a daily practice. Your loyalty to that is a ring upon the door. Eventually, the joy inside will open a window and look out to see who's there. Once there was a teacher who was approached by one of his students, and the student said, I want to bring my cousin to see you, but he's not interested. So the teacher smiled and said, tell him we have fish soup. After decades of seeking, my personal fish soup looks like this. I'm a mystic, one who believes, or should I say experiences, truths that are beyond the intellect. As a girl, as I mentioned, I was raised in a very conservative evangelical church. As I grew up, I looked for something more inclusive, something that Rumi expressed when he said, love is the religion and the universe is the book. After decades of seeking, I've concluded that understanding all religions as poetry exposes their jewels and dissolves the theological contradictions that seem to make them incompatible with each other. In other words, for me, all religions are true in the way that poetry is true, and not true in the way that it isn't. That is to say, not literally. Instead, each and every one, provides priceless teaching stories as ways to evoke the deepest parts of ourselves. After reading a poem, we don't ask, is it true? But rather, did it touch me? Poems don't have to agree with each other. Each one can illuminate something different. So some of what I've been sharing with you today can be understood as a kind of fish soup, my fish soup. Please understand that my vocabulary and my conclusions can be seen as metaphors, as teaching stories. You don't need to eat all the soup, but see if there are parts of it that you can use. The common vocabulary of spiritual pursuits like God and soul and beloved, these are no more than unsatisfactory attempts to name the unnameable. I think we shouldn't allow the history of these words to rob us of their treasure. Rumi puts it this way. Rumi says, not Christian or Jew or Muslim, not Hindu, Buddhist, Sufi, or Zen, not any religion or cultural system. I am not from the East or the West. I am not an entity in this world or the next. I did not descend from Adam and Eve or any origin story. My place is the placeless, a trace of the traceless, neither body or soul. I belong to the beloved. I've seen the two worlds as one. That's one of the more, that one takes, I think, years of contemplation to understand it completely, if we ever can. For those of us who don't always know how to proceed with our spiritual growth, Rumi offers this. Rumi says, these spiritual window shoppers, they idly ask, how much is that? Oh, I'm just looking. They handle 100 items and put them down. Shadows with no capital. What is spent is love and two eyes wet with weeping. But these walk into a shop and their whole lives pass suddenly in that moment, in that shop. Where did you go? Nowhere. What did you have to eat? Nothing much. Even if you don't know what you want, buy something to be part of the general exchange. Start a huge, foolish project like Noah. It makes absolutely no difference what people think of you. Imagine that idea. It makes no difference what people think of you. Rumi's wisdom has led me to some new and priceless spiritual journeys. When I looked for and opened to them, I actually had mystical experiences. I felt the unknowable. I experienced the unspeakable. And I saw my life and the vast beauty of the universe and of the raindrop that is my life as perfect in every detail. And I knew there was absolutely nothing to fear. I would love to take up permanent residence in that state, but I just don't know how. I forget over and over again, but I can never forget having visited there. Since I learned that a 13th century ecstatic poet could often take me there with a single line of his poetry, I haven't been able to get enough of him. I hope it'll be the same for you. And I know that it probably is for some of you. And I do want to say when we get to the Q&A that those of you who might have a poem that you like or a story that you'd like to share, please feel free. So to summarize, Jalaluddin Rumi was a devout Muslim. It's important to remember that. He was a Muslim who said, nevertheless, I see one altar in temple, mosque, and cathedral. He taught us that there's nothing to fear in death and that we can recover and we recover from and transform even our deepest grief, as he showed us how in his own life. He urges us to see the beauty all around us in everything, and he wants us to accept and cherish whatever our circumstances are. I appreciate your attention and your interest. And I want to encourage those of you who already love Rumi to share anything you'd like during the Q&A coming up shortly. But first, I want to end with Rumi's most iconic poem, which many of you probably know. It's called The Guest House. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, for each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Thank you.